Romans 9:18 through 21. Therefore, God has mercy on whom he wants to have mercy, and he hardens whom he wants to harden. Free will at its finest. Apostle Paul continues, one of you will say to me, then why does God still blame us? For who is able to resist his will? Which is obviously the wrong question to ask, since it makes entirely too much sense, ladies and gentlemen. Shall what is formed say to one who formed it, why did you make me like this? Does not the potter have the right to make out of lumps of clay some pottery for special purposes and some for common use? In Paul's analogy of the clay potter and the clay, if the clay is being judged for being the way the potter formed it, I believe it absolutely has the right to question the potter. The whole notion that people don't have the right to question those in authority encourages blind obedience, stifles critical thinking, and promotes injustice. We can and we should question any gods that are proposed to us. We should not be held accountable by a God that made us according to his will that we didn't get a say in. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Do you have an entirely different thought on the matter? Give us a call, because the show is about to begin. Hello. Welcome, everyone. Today is July 14th, 2024. I am your host, Sydney Davis Jr. And joining me today is the illustrious Richard. Richard, how are you doing, Richard Gilliver?
I am very, very well, thank you. I'm very happy to be hosting with you again. We had some great fun last time.
Yes.
And, I'm looking forward to some calls coming in today. I'm not sure it's the European Cup final. So stop watching the soccer, everyone, and give us a call instead if you're a believer. Let's have that conversation.
I would be surprised if, the only people watching the sports events today were just Christians. They just flocked. It's like an evangelical thing. It turns out they love soccer or football, whoever's watching. So, Richard, quick question. Is it Gilliver or Gilliver?
It's Gilliver. It
is Gilliver. Okay. Because I've heard it both, and I just realized as I was saying it, I wasn't sure if I was saying it right. Well, everybody who's tuning in today, who's watching, Talk Heathen is a product of the atheist community of Austin, a 501c3 nonprofit organization dedicated to the promotion of atheism, critical thinking, secular humanism, and the separation of religion and government. It's also a live call-in show, and we have open lines, so get your calls in at 512-991-9242 or from your computer at tiny.cc/callth. Because you know what makes me crazy? Richard, you know what makes me insane?
What makes you crazy? What makes you insane?
When people complain about the calls in the chat and then they don't call.
Yes.
Call.
Yes, I'm with you.
We want you to call. Call us. Give it to us. Throw it hard. Do whatever you got to do. I don't know what I'm saying. This is why it's a weird day. So anyway, we're going to the question of the week. Talk Heathen to me. But first, let's see here. I'm messing up the script. It's time for our Talk Heathen to Me segments where we get into the question of the week. That's what I was supposed to say. This is behind the scenes, ladies and gents. Last week, we asked you, what would Jesus tweet? And here are the top 3 answers. And I have not seen these before, so I'm really interested to see what these are. Number 3, from Leith Crowther. Richard, would you like to read this one, or would you like me to read this one?
I will read it. What would Jesus tweet? I know people don't understand why I make mass shooters do what they do, but I work in mysterious ways. Yeah.
Hashtag deal with it. Hashtag
yeah, I
son
missed
of
that
God.
bit at the end. Yes, thank you. Thank you for correcting. I don't wear these for any reason whatsoever. Thank you for that. So now, yeah.
Hashtag do you know who my dad is?
I've lost it. What would Jesus tweet? I know what. Yeah. Sydney, take us away before I lose it completely.
Number 2, Corporations Ate My Baby said, question of the week, what would Jesus tweet? No way Elon is going to drive this cyber camel through the eye of the needle, yo. Gotta have that yo at the end. Otherwise, it's not Jesus.
Yeah, and it's definitely a Jesus accent. I can understand that. That's from the Middle East. That would definitely be Aramaic spoken with the yo at the end.
Yes.
You can read any almanac and that will go through that specifically for you if you're in any doubt whatsoever.
Yes, I'm very well known for my Aramaic accent, so that is how that would have sounded according to history. And then number 1, I don't know why I did number 2. Number 1, according to Cragen Gray, what would Jesus tweet? People think Twitter is toxic, but they've never had a conversation with my dad. Hashtag, do you know who my dad is?
Do you know who my dad is? I think that's a recurring theme for today.
Yes. So the prompt for next week is, what would you say to an evangelizer that they would never forget? Enter your best answer below the video in the comments, not in the live chat, in the comments, because if it's in the live chat, we likely won't be able to see it for next week. And we will reveal the top 3 answers. Could yours be it? You'll never know if you don't leave a comment below. That's right, Richard, right? They'll never know. Like you miss 100. Isn't there like you miss 100% of the chances you don't take or something like that? I don't know. Maybe that's a verse. I think that's like the 12th commandment. I don't know what's going on. So Richard, what would you say to an evangelizer that they would never forget?
I would say I agree with you. Absolutely, I agree with you. God exists. Let's go to the mosque and praise him.
There we go. I think I would say, why? And just make them think about what they just said, and they'll never forget that. I think it'll keep them up at night being like, why? Existential crisis. Love your answer, Richard. Love your answer. And I'm interested to see what everybody else's answer is. But reminder, please, on the comments of the video as opposed to the live chat if you want to qualify for next week. So next, we're going to go to the crew cam. We could not do this without the insanely talented and hardworking team behind the scenes. So give it a wave, everybody. We love our crew. Thank you to the audio people, moderators, notes and stamps, and call-in screeners. We have a whole team of people, which is why it goes well. Because if I was the only person doing this and people are like, it's going well, since when? I've just, this episode is just going to fall apart, I think, with me as the lead. But that's great. It's live television, people.
Can you imagine myself and Sydney as relying on us to produce anything of any quality whatsoever?
No, absolutely not. Absolutely not. So these people are the reason why this episode will not fall apart. It'll be great. It sounds great. It looks great. It's going to stay great. So there you go. So that being said, Richard, what are your thoughts in terms of today's show? Who do you think is going to call in? Do you think we're going to get any people that are just going to ruffle our feathers? Do you think I will be converted to Christianity by the end of today's episode?
I hope so. And the reason I say that is because if that's the case, if someone's going to come up with a compelling argument or good evidence that God exists, I want to know as many true things as possible. And we often get this thing leveled against us that we just don't want to believe, and that's not true. If God exists in reality, I want to believe in him. That's the first thing and foremost thing I want to do. So if you have that evidence, if you have that proof, especially the person who's in chat right now preaching at us, who has not called in, give us a call. Put it on the line. Don't just sit there in chat. You're not there to preach. Give us a call. Let's have the conversation.
Let's do it. Speaking of calls, Richard, I'm going to let you pick. What's our first call? Who are we taking first today?
I'm going to take Christina is labeled as only the USA, who wants to talk about how to keep religion out of addiction.
Very interesting.
Christina, are you there?
I am.
Welcome, Hi. Christina. Thanks for calling in.
So I am a theist. I am a pagan. I believe in multiple deities. I've been watching your show for a while, and I agree that, the Abrahamic faiths don't really match up. So, being a nurse, I see a lot of people that have addiction issues. I work in corrections. I've worked in drug and alcohol rehab. And we go through the DBT process, which is kind of a thought-stopping process where you take responsibility for your actions. And I see a lot of people go through the 12-step and they relapse. And when you talk to them, it comes to, well, you didn't pray hard enough, or the devil got to you. Instead of taking accountability for your actions, like instead of not going to the open bar wedding the devil tempted you and you went to the open bar wedding, so you relapsed and you got a DWI and you got in trouble again. Instead of somebody saying, well, I didn't go to my ex-boyfriend's house, who used to be my dealer. And now my sister is saying, you're weak, you're pathetic, when I knew my limits and I didn't go to my ex's house. So how do you guys promote taking religion out of that aspect and instead saying you're accountable? Because seeing people relapse is pretty hard to see.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not a therapist, I'm not a counselor, but I think what I've seen in discussions with people about accountability and about whether or not God is responsible for certain wins and losses is, I think it helps to start with convincing them that they're responsible for their wins as often as they're responsible for their losses. So instead of saying right off the bat, like, well, you need to take accountability for your relapse, it's more of a, I don't think God deserves credit for your wins. I don't think he deserves credit for the 3 days or the 2 days or the 1 month that you were sober. I think you deserve credit for that. You know, I tell people this regularly when they say, oh, thank God for this house. And I say, you're thanking God that you knew your budget. You have the job that earns that amount of money. You went to Zillow. You typed in your budget. You typed in the area you need to go. You set up the tour. You toured the house. You're thanking God for all of that. Was that God or was that you? I think it's easier to start letting people take accountability for their wins and for the things they can do. And then once they've gotten a hold on that and they're more likely to say that they deserve credit for that, they'll be more likely to hear you out when you also try to get them to take accountability for their losses. It's like, so now that we agree that you were accountable for all those good things that happened to you and all those positive moves you've made, let's talk a little bit about how we can now take accountability for the decisions we made that put us back here in this arena, kind of back in this, without calling it like a failure. It's like the same exact person who you can now give credit for all those great things that you're doing. Let's give that person credit now for the ways that they can work towards improving themselves and give themselves credit for, yeah, you did go to that wedding, that wasn't the devil. I think we can agree if you were the one who toured that house and got that house, you're also the one who decided to go to that wedding and didn't have to go to that wedding knowing that it was open bar. Richard, what are your thoughts on that? Do you agree, disagree?
Yeah, I agree largely with you there, especially on the on the affirmation part. Getting people to understand that it's their it's their hard work, it's their skills, it's their mindset which has got them where they are, that have got them that positive results. I've had these conversations with people in my own life, who've been religious and have given God the credit for all the great things they've achieved. And that is one of the things that so frustrates me when people do that. And I think it's so important to get people to realize that it's you. You've done that. God didn't do that for you. You did that yourself. Yeah. And, take responsibility. It's, we can say, it's easy to say take accountability to somebody for mistakes they've made. Right. But it's so important to say take responsibility for the achievements you've gained. Because so often people don't do that. So often people will, give credit or praise to something outside of themselves for that. It doesn't have to be God, it can be anything, but people do that all the time, and they should be taking real pride in what they have achieved themselves. And if one day you take a step back and you fall, just accept that as part of the journey. And we that's what life is.
Right. Yeah.
Nothing in life is rosy all of the time. And for anybody, everybody has, pitfalls and stops along the way, whether it's in your marriage, whether it's in your work, whether it's just in your personal interests. Everybody has pitfalls along the way, and just accept them, learn to accept them as part of this journey you're on. And I think when you do that, when you get into that mindset and you can give yourself that credit for the things you have achieved, you move so far beyond that kind of childish. I was going to say childlike, but I think it's more childishness that it seeks to give someone else credit for your hard work.
Right. And I think the only thing more toxic than blaming all of your problems on the devil is blaming all of your losses on yourself and all of your wins on God. I think that's the only thing that could possibly be more toxic. Is anything positive that happens to you is God, but anything negative that happens to you is entirely your fault. And because the church already does such a great job of victim blaming. If you don't hear responses to your prayers, it's because you didn't pray enough. If you don't get the miracles in your life that you've been wanting or that you need, it's because of something you're not doing. So if you build people up to believe in themselves enough to credit themselves with their wins and their achievements, even the smallest ones, I think they'll be more likely to take ownership for the losses because they can see it from both perspectives. They can say, okay, yeah, I worked really hard and I did that. I let my, guard down a little bit, or I did something irresponsible and this bad thing happened, as opposed to praise God for the good things, but it's all your fault for the bad. Christina, I don't know, does that answer your question, or is that helpful?
Yeah, I think it's really heartbreaking to see that blame. And yeah, like you said, they should be celebrating the wins as well.
Yeah.
Christina, as a theist, how would you respond if we weren't talking about a third party, if this was you in your own life, how would you kind of take this? If when you achieve something, would you give any credit to the gods that you believe in? Would you kind of give them thanks for giving you strength to be able to achieve something? I'm just interested in your kind of take on it.
Great question.
I do. And I celebrate, and I'll put out, bowls of food for the deities that I appreciate. And whenever I stumble and fall, and it's like, okay, thanks for the lesson. I'll see what happened. How can I use this to improve? Because I know that, things aren't necessarily handed to you, and I see the deities as they're guiding them, or they're guiding you. And
what would you say is the difference between that and somebody blaming the devil for their slip-ups or their relapses?
So I just, that's a good question. That is a really good question.
Yeah, because I think in my mind, that even if you're also thanking them for the positives by considering anything negative that happens a lesson you're supposed to learn from, I think that might be something that you can reflect on as well and say, is this a lesson I need to learn from, or is this something that, like a decision that I knew had consequences if it went awry, or something I should have prepared for more? I don't know. It's an interesting thought to wonder the difference between Christian gods and demons and devils being blamed for things versus other religions, other theist beliefs.
Yeah. So I don't believe in the devil or anything like that. And so I just think that it's kind of the entity that everybody likes to poke and blame, and instead of taking responsibility, they just say, oh, that's, the devil, or it's the Satan, instead of taking accountability for, well, I did a bad thing, or I messed up.
What would you say is the kind of, if we're going to use a term such as yardstick, then between the difference between, rather than, answering directly about, I think that, I do this in my own faith. I do give credit to God's.
Mhm.
What would you say, what is the independent yardstick, which is outside of your faith and outside of these theistic faiths with devils and demons and things? What yardstick would you say is there to say that this is something that we can take, we can say, this is something that I have achieved, that I've not used help from a deity from? And what would you say is the criteria that deity has to meet with that yardstick to give that praise, to give that deity affirmation, to give it the credit for that thing?
I don't really have anything that I could use, I guess. I understand that it's kind of like make-believe. It just leaves you with a good feeling, but there's really nothing that I can point to and say that's a god or something like that.
Do the deities that you believe in punish as well, or do they only do positive actions or teach lessons meant for the positive?
I believe they only teach lessons for the positive.
So if somebody in recovery said what happened to me this weekend, the slip up I made this weekend was just a lesson for me to learn from, as opposed to it was the devil's fault, it was this, it was that. If they said, I do think the devil did that, or I do think God did that, but they did it to teach me a lesson to not do it again, would that be better in your opinion, or would that be still problematic in any way?
Thinking about it, I think that it would be better, but I can definitely see what you're saying, because they're kind of the same parallel, if that's what I'm understanding from what you're saying.
Yeah, it goes back to the whole, even if they're seeing it in a positive light, I think that lack of accountability is still there from my perspective. Even if you are thanking a deity for teaching you a positive lesson, you're still not holding yourself to accountability.
Okay.
Yeah,
Your thoughts, Richard?
Yeah, I just want to say, Christina, look, I've enjoyed this call immensely.
Yeah, this has been awesome.
And I think it's great when we get to talk about subjects that we can kind of look into and explore together, rather than just the I'm right, you're wrong kind of calls that we so often get. And I really, really appreciate you calling, Christina. I think I would recommend that you listen back to this call. You'll listen back to some of the questions myself and Sydney have been asking you, and kind of really off air within yourself, really take the time to chew them over and have a think about them, so you're not on the pressure of doing it on a phone call and when there's thousands of people listening. Do it in your own time. Take that time to really have a think about it. Think about what those yardsticks are that you use. Think about what it is about your gods and the affirmation which you give your gods, which might be different to the affirmations that Christians give their gods or Muslims give their gods, and really kind of chew over if there is something different there, if there is something independent which you can say, look, this is what my God presents, and this is what can be demonstrated to be a positive effect that the God gives me, rather than something I do myself, which I then, shine onto my God as though it's the God that's done it. And have a chew over that and give us a call back and let us know where you go with that, because I think this is a really, really interesting kind of conversation we can have kind of long term, and kind of follow your progress and take this conversation a lot further. I'm going to let you go, Christina. Thank you very much for calling. That, Sydney, was an amazing call to start the show off with.
Yeah, I think something that we touched on there that I don't think is addressed often, if ever, is that accountability isn't just taking accountability for your mistakes and your problems, but accountability is also taking responsibility for your wins. And whether or not you say, I drove drunk because the devil told me to, or you say, I got a DUI because God's teaching me a lesson to improve myself, while that's a more positive spin, that's still not taking accountability. So you can miss the opportunity to take accountability in ways that aren't just blaming yourself for the worst of everything, but also not giving praise to something that doesn't deserve praise, and also not spinning the things that you did wrong into a lesson from God, as opposed to, or maybe you just drove drunk, or maybe you just did the thing, and so we think a lot about accountability as stop blaming the devil, you did this, instead of stop giving credit to God for teaching you a beneficial lesson when maybe you did this. And I thought that was a really fantastic thing topic to broach. We really don't hear that very often, and I really appreciated her call.
Yeah, it's great. That perspective as well. I don't want to talk too much about this because the call has gone now and I don't want to say anything that they can't respond to. But I think that perspective of kind of coming at it about the kind of difficulties you see in another religion, and then having to stop and think about, hang on a minute, is that what I'm doing myself?
Right.
I think that's so important.
Right. And we face that a lot, I think, in atheism, where we have to catch ourselves not doing the exact same evangelizing that we hate so much in Christianity, not doing the same exact. Like I spoke to an atheist once who was talking about the things he tells his kids in order to keep them from being indoctrinated by his spouse, who is Christian. And I had to ask him, what's the difference between what you're doing and what she's doing, right? And his response was, well, what I'm doing is correct. And I'm like, but what she thinks she's doing is correct, right? So it's not just religion versus religion, it's atheism versus religion sometimes too. If we're not careful, we can become the very thing we swore we would destroy.
Yes, absolutely we can. Shall we move on?
Sure.
Okay, it's time for our annual Bat Cruise fundraiser. Join us on August the 24th with Forrest Valkai, J-Mac, Secular Rarity, and many other familiar faces will be in attendance. Get more information and buy your tickets at tiny.cc/batcruise. The ACA wants you to know what is going on in our community, and for that, we've got an updated website. Head to www.atheist-community.org, where you can learn about the organization itself, its policies, and how you can get involved. And we have merch.
Yes.
Get your Talk Heathen merch at tiny.cc/merchaca, and we've got some new pins, backpacks, onesies, and youth t-shirts. We've got some great new designs all across the ACA range, so definitely get yourself over and check that out. But buy your Talk Heathen merch first before you buy any merch for the other shows. I'm just saying.
Yes. And now I'm going to let you pick, Richard. Should we take the next call, or should we listen to some voicemails or read some mean comments and tweets?
I think we have a few calls stacked up, so let's jump into a call. We're going to take, please forgive me if I get your name wrong, Vitali, who would like to talk about if there is an infinite universe where there are possibilities if there is an afterlife. Vitali, first of all and most importantly, am I pronouncing your name correctly?
It's Vitali.
Vitali. Okay.
That's kind of the root, yes.
Perfect. Well, thanks for calling, Vitali.
What's that?
I was just saying thanks for calling, but I'm Southern, so I said it Vitali.
That's okay. I heard all the different variations, so I'm used to it. Well, first, I just wanted to say I'm a fan of your show. I've been listening for a few years. It's definitely opened my, I used to be religious at a certain point, and then I had a bit of a crisis of faith, I guess.
Yes.
Somebody showed me like a mathematical formula, and anyways, that's a separate discussion. But I kind of had the main one was about the infinite universe thing, but I had two other things that are very small if I could get to them too, because one of them is just an anecdote and the other is a contradiction in the Bible.
Well, let's hit your main one first, and then we'll see how we go. And if we've got time for the other two, we'll kind of come back to them.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, this is kind of an interesting idea I had. So I've been reading about the origin of the universe and how there's the multiverse theory and possibly a cyclical universe theory where the Big Bang just happens over and over again, or if there's like, we don't actually know how big the universe is, it could potentially be infinite. And again, this is not, we don't know this for certain, but let's just pretend that it could be. And so if it is indeed, if there is some form of like infinity or eternity, then doesn't the law of probability dictate infinite possibility? Which means anything that is logically possible is happening or has already happened. And if every possibility has happened, then that means us, the individual, has a possibility of being reborn with our experiences. But furthermore, that also means that we will experience all logical possibilities infinite amount of times. Would you say
what makes you think being reborn is a logical possibility?
Well, if we are all made of that, like, so what, like, probability, like the probability of us existing happened, right? Like we're just a bunch of atoms that came together and then emergence formed and our consciousness came to be. So we know for a fact that us existing is a logical possibility, correct?
Yeah, we exist, yeah, as individuals, yes. But what makes you think that we can be reborn specifically?
Well, I guess it goes into a deeper question of what makes us us. But isn't it like if everything in the universe is made out of matter, right? Atoms, our memories are still like, you know, chemicals which are broken down to quarks. Couldn't they, in an infinite amount of time, be reassembled through chance?
I don't know, and I don't know what you mean by this. This is going to be one of them calls, I'm afraid, where I'm going to keep asking you questions on questions about what you've raised. You know, it depends what you mean by chance. You know, this is a word that a lot of theists use. You know, they say, you know, the atheists, and I know you're not a theist, but a lot of theists will say atheists think the universe came together by chance. And that is a misuse of the common meaning of chance. So it's really important that you define your terms when you're using words like chance to tell us exactly what you mean by that.
Well, and can I give a response and you tell me if I'm not answering the question at all or if I'm helping in any way, and that'll help me kind of more like better understand the question. If I understand what you're saying or what you're asking, I would probably give the same response that I would give to most other theories and questions and opportunities of kind of thought expansion. And I would say, if science backed up such a thing, I would believe it. If science showed evidence of some kind of reincarnation, recreation, rebirth, revisit of some kind, I would believe it when presented with the evidence. But as things stand now, I don't see evidence to support that idea or that thought. Is that helpful?
I mean, that's fair. I mean, I'm in the same position. I just thought it was an interesting idea to think about because, I mean, this kind of stemmed from something I heard before where if you give like 1 million monkeys a typewriter and you give them an infinite amount of time, they'll eventually write all of Shakespeare just by slapping their hands on the typewriter.
But I also don't think that's true. I trust me, as somebody who's worked in education, you can give as many monkeys a typewriter as you want and they will still plagiarize.
Well, I guess there's no real way to know, but I just assume that, like, you know, law of probability. I mean, if infinity exists or eternity, but
again, this depends what infinity or eternity is, or the multiverse, because there's so many kind of inbuilt kind of what ifs in your question that it's and I'm genuinely not trying to be difficult, but I think no. There's so much stuff inbuilt into it that, you know, we really have to examine like what we're talking about, because, you know, when we're talking just about the multiverse, there's a Swedish physicist called Max Tegmark, I think it's Max Tegmark, who kind of came up with these different ideas, these different levels of what the multiverse is or what the multiverse could be. And then the least likely of those is that this the kind of that we have entirely separate universes where the fabric of the universe itself is kind of different physics, which probably more akin to what philosophers would call many worlds. That in Tegmark's kind of levels of multiverses is the least likely. It's it's the most out there, and it has no evidence to suggest that it's even possible. Whereas some of his other ideas about the multiverse, which are kind of vary, some of them are like little bubbles which contain our own universe and then expand and become their own universes. It's all fascinating subject we've not got time for here. But if you have a look into his different levels of the multiverse, they're not what we kind of think of as a multiverse. And there's all these different things to take into account when we're asking ourselves questions like this. And this is why philosophy is so beautiful, because it's not just a case of, often on these shows you get kind of philosophy simplified and in a lot of ways nullified, a lot of the arguments that are presented. But it's so fascinating because it's so important to know exactly what you're talking about, to define it correctly, to really get into it. So, and this is a great kind of lesson for everybody listening. So it's a really helpful call, this, to actually, when you're thinking about these things, when you're thinking about something, which appears to be such a simple, I'm getting that excited, I can't even speak. When you think about something that is on the surface of it, appears to be a really simple question, when we really dig down into it, there are so many facets to it that it's not just as easy as saying, well, what if this and what if that? Because there's lots and lots of things to consider in these on the surface simple questions.
I mean, I agree. Like, again, this was just a thought experiment I had, and I just wanted to see if it kind of, based off what we know so far, would it actually have made sense? And it doesn't really particularly require the multiverse, because I know, for an example, the scientist Roger Penrose, he's very a big supporter of the cyclical universe, which means that the Big Bang happens, and then eventually, like, the universe will kind of retract into the Big Bang and happen again an infinite amount of times. And then again, there's also, we don't know how big the universe is. There could be infinite amount of galaxies and stars out there. So it's just a thought I had.
Yeah, I mean, if science backs it up, I believe it. If science says it's not a thing or they don't know, then I say it's not a thing or I don't know. That's my simple Southern-fied response.
And we're certainly not trying to dismiss you.
No, not at all.
It's it's a good question to bring up, because these things are so important, I think, to kind of get into and delve into and look into it. But again, for fear of repeating myself, it shows how much thought goes into a thought experiment.
Right. And my master's was in writing, so that's all I have to say about something this deep is just, I don't know, science backs it up, then I agree.
What is your opinion on your own question?
What's that?
What's your opinion on your own question? What do you think is the answer to this thought experiment?
I mean, again, I'm agnostic to it. The way I would say is, I don't know, just like anything else, but I would like for this to be the case.
Yeah. Oh, why would you? What would the benefit of that being the case be?
Well, I guess part of me likes the idea of not non-existing after I die.
That's true. Hey, I
the idea
agree.
of experiencing. Yeah, and I think this is like again, I'm not like a scientist, but logically speaking, it sounds like a possibility, I guess, if you're trying to use science or not religion. So, it kind of gives me some hope in a sense.
I mean, even if you are trying to use religion, it makes just about as much sense as anything else that's proposed on that. You know what I mean? Like, all humans came from Adam and Eve. Well, then this is also just as believable as a hypothesis.
Yeah, and remember that there are some religious groups that do think that we have a cyclical universe.
That's true. That's true. As long as I don't wind up in Nashville every time, that's fine with me. I hate this place.
if there's time, is it all right if I get to the other two things?
Hit us with one really quick, and then we'll see how much time we've got, because we have got quite a few callers on the line.
Okay. Well, I guess I'll do the anecdote then. So I hear a lot of this kind of argument about how, because every culture has like a version of God or an afterlife or something, that must mean something like must exist. And I hear this argument pretty frequently. And I experienced something that kind of puts a wrench into that whole argument. So I'm trying to write a book, and I developed this magic system, and it was very articulate. I called it weaving. And then years later, I read the Wheel of Time, and guess what? It had the exact same magic system with the exact same name. And not only that, but there was also another example of me creating this kingdom called the Kingdom of Whispers, and I read another book, and they have the same kingdom. So ultimately, I conclude that humans just, are able to invent the same ideas, even if they're not related.
Yeah.
So have you ever read the book Why We Believe in Gods by J. Anderson Thompson?
Unfortunately not.
Highly recommend it. It's a very short book. It's a very interesting read, but basically it's an entire book about why it benefited human beings throughout the history of the world to believe in a god and to invent a god to believe in, and why it continues to benefit and appear in cultures that otherwise don't really communicate very often, obviously prior to the internet. But it's a very interesting look at all the ways that believing that a god exists and believing that a deity is watching you and is there for you and cares about you is actually directly linked to the survival of humans. And I highly recommend you read it, because it makes why religion is so prevalent make a lot of sense. And it also makes a lot of the rules that are found to be similar in so many religions. We're talking about even as far back as the Aztecs and the Incans and the Mayans, why some of those details match up and align with evangelical Christianity in the United States in 2024. But basically, human beings oftentimes need to believe in a deity in order to promote things like working together, sharing, in order to not feel isolated, in order for, human beings are pack animals in a sense. And it's very beneficial in terms of getting everybody to cooperate, getting everyone to behave, getting everyone to do things like hunt and share and gather that assist in the survival of the tribe, to avoid murder and killing other members of the tribe, which has always been the opposite of beneficial for their survival, and also for the survival of loneliness and isolation and things that can impact a human's mental health. And so I highly recommend reading it. But I think that is, in my opinion, mainly why you find religions across cultures, because there are some ways that will always benefit human beings, at least as a whole tribe, to believe that there's a deity as opposed to not believing in anything.
And just to add to that point, I also think part of it is, you kind of briefly touched upon this, but we are social creatures, and biologically, we are made, we evolved because we have pattern recognition. And I think when we look at things, we try to find patterns in virtually everything we see. And so if you're out in the world, in the wilderness, and don't know anything about the world, you'll see the stars, you'll see the sky, and you'll make up some sort of explanation, which often is God in the absence of evidence.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. And the whole thing of emotion and all these things came up, and because of the way we work together, because of the way our brains work, because of that pattern recognition that you mentioned, because of the questions we were asking about the world. For me, the answer to this question is, when we get these people who are saying, well, it's been proven that we're all prone to believe in a God, so therefore God must exist. That doesn't answer why all these God claims are so very, very different, and some of them aren't even the God claim itself that might be present in that belief system might not even be the central part of that belief system. And that, we see this in things like Buddhism, where it seeks to answer those big questions, and there are gods in the kind of original scriptures, but those gods take a kind of sidestep to what is actually important in that belief system. So it's all well and good saying, well, all this proves is that we are prone to believing things which aren't true for the sake of community, for the sake of how we understand the world around us. It doesn't prove that any gods at all, never mind a particular one, exists.
Yeah, I another small anecdote, but I remember when I was a kid, I was probably around 9 years old. I invented my own mythology, and it was not based on anything. It was just like things I imagined, and eventually I just kind of ended up believing it. And then over time I realized, well, this is stupid. So, yeah.
And that's how religion works. That's how it happens.
Yep.
Yeah. Right, we'll let you go. Thanks for calling. So give us a call back with your other little question you had, because we have got quite a few callers on the line.
Yes.
But feel free to call us back, and we'll go into that then. But thank you very much for your call.
Thanks, Vitali. We appreciate you. Richard, before we move on to the next call, I would like to hit up some of these super chats that are rolling in, because I really appreciate them, and I want them to feel like we love them as much as we do. So the first super chat is Miranda Rensberger, member for 6 months. $5 super chat. They say, I can't stay, but I wanted to pop in and say, hey, happy International Non-Binary People's Day. I did not know that. I had no idea. Thanks for pointing that out.
Yeah, thank you very much for pointing that out. Alan Ferguson at $10, who said, great show. Loved your discussion about taking credit for our own successes. Absolutely.
Thank you. I would thank God for that topic. He gave me what I needed in order to make such an interesting discussion. And Jimmy Jr., our friend, he's been a member for 6 months, donates $4.99 because he can't even donate $5. Oh, what you miss 100% of the shots you don't take. That's a quote from Wayne Gretzky that is often misattributed to Michael Jordan.
Yeah, and while we're on thanking people, there's another great set of people we'd like to thank, and that is the top 5 patrons who are amazing. We appreciate all our patrons, and very much, appreciate everything they do. Very much appreciate everything they, support us with. That help is really, really useful for us as a show. Having that particular direction just for Talk Heathen allows us to do so much and create so much of a product that we want to give back to you. So I'm going to hand it over to our regular voice of the patrons, Sydney Davis Jr., who will no doubt have a particular accent for us to go through those with. Take it away, Sydney.
Yes, and what accent would you like that to be? What do you think we should do today?
Well, as England are in the European Cup final today against Spain, I think you should do half in an English accent and half in a Spanish.
Should I now? Am I doing like posh English, or am I doing like street normie English?
You choose. Take it away.
Okay, so I've been watching a lot of this show called A First Date that they do in England, and I'm going to do the accent of like all the women on that show. Top 5 patrons: Dinglebar Jackson, Oops, All Singularity, Devor Valhin, Calvete Helvete, Left on the Lives, Honourable Mention, Jessica Corbish.
That was a strange mixture of Lancashire and Chinese.
There you go. Yep. The infamous Chinese Lancashire accent. That's what they all sound like. They say it like everything's a question. Like, how you doing?
I love that. That's fantastic. And I hope you'll never, ever try and get me back for making you do that. Let's move on to Stephen from New York, who wants to talk to us about the fact that spirituality may be real. Hello, Stephen. Thank you for calling.
Hi. First of all, I want to say I'm an atheist.
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah.
I think the human body is too complex for there not to be a magical aspect to life.
Interesting.
What do you mean by a magical
Yeah.
aspect?
Well, basically, for example, like your immune system knows that when there's a bacterial infection or parasites or a virus or chemicals, it targets it and heals it. How would your body know how to do that without a spiritual aspect to life?
Why would a spiritual aspect be necessary to do that?
Why would that be necessary?
Because it's too, because your body is too conscious in a way. Like evolution is too conscious. It's like it knows how to make you, like how to heal your body from certain things, make you think certain things to survive that lead to survival. And I don't think that could happen. I don't think that's just physicalism.
Now, let me say this. The definition of spirituality, because the topic was that spirituality is real and exists. The definition of spirituality is the belief or concern that there is a human spirit and there is a soul and things like that. Spirituality obviously is real. Like the belief and the concern of the existence of a spirit is a real thing. People believe it. They talk about it all the time. Whether or not spirits are real, so far, based on what you're offering and presenting, I don't think a spirit is necessary for the body to function the way it's supposed to function and to basically for our automated functions to do what they're supposed to do, you know, blinking, breathing, cell turnover. And we've seen what happens to the human body when those automated functions stop functioning correctly. That's when you get illness. That's when you get disease. That's when you get all sorts of genetic issues that are sometimes passed down from parent to child. Sometimes you develop them over time. But I'm curious why a spirit and like the spiritual existence of a higher power of some sort or magic needs to be necessary in order for the body to do what the body has developed over millions of years to do on its own.
Because the body is a non-conscious thing, so I would think there would need to be to know that something is wrong, like to know that a virus, for your body to know that a virus is bad for you and target it. I think there would have to be a non-natural aspect to that.
But don't you think that that's a very natural occurrence that's happening? Like catching a virus, germs, cells doing certain things. Don't you think that that is, in a sense, a very natural occurrence in which a natural response would be the most sensical response before we would turn towards supernatural and spirituality and magic? I guess I'm curious why. I feel like there are 1,000 options in between being totally, completely autonomous versus being spiritual and magical. And I'm curious your thoughts on that.
Again, I'm agnostic about it. I'm not completely sure, but the body just seems too complex to me, and evolution seems too complex to me. That's why I think this.
What about spirituality doesn't seem as complex, if not more?
Because it brings, in a way, sort of decisions to non-conscious things like a body, I guess.
So I would actually disagree that the body is unconscious. I would say the body is quite conscious, but there are certain things happening within the body that don't require consciousness, like cell turnover, like your blood flowing, your heart pumping. But the body itself, your brain and your thoughts and your ideas are, in my opinion, evidence of an actual consciousness. While not everything that it's required for your survival is a conscious movement or motion or action, I would actually disagree and say that the body overall is a conscious thing. I mean, Richard, am I making sense?
Yeah, you're making sense to me. I've got this kind of... I've got this difficulty here with Stephen, with this kind of idea, this personification you give into these functions that are occurring within the body, as though they have their own independent kind of life and autonomy. And I'd invite you to kind of have a look at how maybe a car engine works. and see that there are all these processes going on which are connected to each other. And they don't all have to be individually autonomous for this process to work as a whole. And I think that might be the mistake you're making here. You're kind of granting autonomy to something which isn't autonomous in itself, to something which doesn't have a conscience in and of itself, but is part of a larger kind of thing which is working.
But how did your body evolve to do those things, like fight viruses, for example?
That's
Or if
just
you ingest chemicals, how does it target it?
I mean, I think dying of poison is an example of how your body can't always fight off, you know, certain chemicals and things. But I think your body's system is a very, very advanced machine, basically, that has had millions of years to develop. You know, we didn't just appear one day complete humans the way that we are. Evolution has shown us that when certain things don't work, those versions of creatures die off. And when they do work, creatures make sure to mate with other creatures that have those traits. And slowly over time, we develop into what we know as human beings that we are today, where the functions that serve us the best are the functions that survive and that are the most common, and the functions that didn't serve us well, or the versions of human beings that malfunctioned or that lacked what they needed in order to survive, died off and don't exist anymore. And even modern day, now when the body doesn't function appropriately, we see things like illnesses, like death, like birth defects, like mental health problems and things that happen to people when the body doesn't function properly. I don't think there's any sign whatsoever of spirituality there, just because it's a complicated process. We've had millions of years to develop these complicated processes. We've done so many trial and error, and unfortunately the error means usually horrible things, right? But I think the human body just existing the way it is has taken so long that I might argue it's not spirituality at all that has anything to do with it, or magic or any higher power. It's just science working as science works, and the human body working as it's found best suits it and best aids it for survival, and adaptations happening thanks to both the human body and to science. But these are all very conscious changes and opportunities that we've taken over time, and decisions that we've made in terms of picking mates and things that we do and do not do whenever we get sick, or things we eat when we want to feel a certain way or cure a certain disease. So I don't know. In my opinion, there are a million different answers to that, none of which lend themselves to spirituality.
Yeah, and I think
selection is.
Yeah.
Sorry, Stephen, go ahead.
I do know what natural selection is, but what I mean is, like, how do random mutations happen that lead to that natural selection?
I don't think they are random. I think they develop over time. I think it's slow. It's a very slow process that's taken millions of years. And I don't think it's random at all. I think it might be new to us. We might be seeing it for the first time at certain points, but I don't think anything to do with the development of living organisms has been random.
I think there's something really important, Stephen, that we kind of should consider when asking these kinds of questions. And that is that, you know, we shouldn't, you know, and I see this so much from kind of young earth creationists, when they don't give an explanation as to why they think their position is right, but they want to try and undermine the position that they disagree with. And I think this is in a way what you're doing. Rather than giving an explanation as to how spirituality is the answer or has the answer to this, you're kind of saying, well, I don't understand how it can work, you know, using natural processes. How can this be the case using natural processes? And it doesn't really matter what, you know, even if we had no understanding at all of how it works using natural processes, if the alternative that you think is the case is its spirituality, then there should be an explanation as to how that spirituality works, how that spirituality is responsible for this. And I think, you know, I'd kind of change your focus a little bit in thinking about this question. And instead of saying, well, I don't understand how natural selection can be the responsible, start saying, well, I think it's spirituality that's responsible. How is it responsible? What does it do? What is the active kind of ingredient, if you like, in spirituality, which causes this to be the case? And I think that is something which is much more important to ask if you're holding this position.
I mean, I'm agnostic to it. I'm not saying like this is 100% fact, you know?
Sure.
Okay, but
yeah.
But you, I mean, the notes on the call screening say that spirituality might be real. So I understand that you kind of you might be agnostic on it, but there must also be a reason as to why you think spirituality may be real, rather than just kind of, well, the other answer doesn't make sense to me. You know, because if you've got a list of candidate explanations, and you think one is even possible, then there should be a reason why you think that thing in particular is possible, rather than just saying, well, option A I don't agree with, therefore
Right.
option B is possible. That's not
Right.
how things work. If you don't agree with option A, if you don't understand or you don't agree with option A, then it's not enough just to fall back on this other option, which you can then just say, well, this may be possible. You need to show that that is possible before we say that it's possible. And this is, I think, a really, really important kind of. It's really important for framing. We frame things as human beings. Everything we look at, we frame. We have frames. We have emotional connections to. We have attachments to with our brains, the way we pattern seek and things. And it's really, really important, especially if we kind of consider as self-critical thinkers or skeptics, to say, how am I assessing this? How am I assessing the possibilities, the probabilities of this? It's all so very important, rather than just saying, no, I'm chucking answer A away, so therefore answer
Right.
B might be a possibility.
Right. And I think also that lends itself to religion and the dangers of joining a religion, because that sort of thought process oftentimes was followed. It's like, oh, if it's not A, then it must be God. If it's not B, then it must be God. And I think that can be a dangerous thought process to follow, as opposed to, is it A, is it B, is it C, is it D, is it E, is it F? If none of those make sense, maybe there's this other alternate explanation that says it's supernatural or it's spiritual. But to leap from, this is complicated, therefore it's spirituality that I'm going to agree in or believe in, I think that might be just as dangerous to just kind of hang your hat on as the religion. And you mentioned that you're not religious, and so I think maybe you might be able to see kind of where I'm coming from. There's not a lot of difference there, in my opinion.
Well, I think the idea of a conscious being doesn't make sense to me, but I think just a magical aspect in general makes more sense. But I do understand what you're saying.
Why do you think a magical aspect makes more sense? Look, we have something that we know exists, and that is the natural world. That is the physical world, and all the things that come from that. Not all of those things, before any apologists jump on in the comments section, not all of those things are in themselves physical. Just because they come from a physical source, it doesn't mean that everything's physical in itself. But we have this thing, we know this thing exists. We don't know that the supernatural or magic or whatever you want to phrase it as exists. So already we're kind of jumping out of the sphere of what we know into just kind of throwing, well, this might be the case.
Well,
and we don't know that. Sydney,
yeah,
sorry.
and additionally, no. And additionally, my thought is, why does that make more sense than religion? Why, if it makes sense, if magic and spirituality makes perfect sense, what was it about religion that made you go, that doesn't make sense? The Holy Spirit, God, that sort of thing. Because I don't know, to me, they sound quite similar, or the things that don't make sense to me about both don't make sense to me about both of them the same way.
Well, first of all, I think gods are always written in books, and people claim to know exactly who they are and what they are. They have these books written about them, and the idea of consciousness that is not an animal doesn't really make sense to me. I don't know. Or a person.
Well, would you say that a spirit is a consciousness that's outside of a person or an animal or a creature? If it can make decisions and make things happen?
It doesn't take on a corporeal manifestation. Does that make sense?
It doesn't make any more sense to me than just believing in a god. Then, like, if there's an extraterrestrial, or if there's a magical force that can dictate decisions and can dictate things that happen and can dictate my life outside of my own choices and consciousness, to me, that's not a lot different than saying it's God doing that, or than saying it's the Holy Spirit doing that.
I disagree. I do think I understand what you're saying. I'm agnostic to it myself. I think it makes more sense than a god.
Why? This is the question we're asking. Why does it make more sense than a god?
Right.
Because we've got an answer, which is the physical. This is a product of a physical world.
Yeah, to me, it sounds the same, just without a name.
Yeah.
Also, I think if there was a god, I think they would show themselves as well. So, and also, I think.
But that's not the question we've just asked. Essentially what we're asking, Stephen, sorry for interrupting, but essentially what we're asking is, why are you multiplying entities as an explanation? And it doesn't matter whether you think a god or a particular god or gods don't make sense. What we're asking is, look, we have this thing that we agree exists. We have this physical world, which I'm sure for the most part, me, you, Sydney, would agree on the vast majority of that thing existing. So then we've got this additional claim on top of it. There's this extra entity. It doesn't matter whether you call it God or magic or the supernatural or whatever you want to call it. Why are you putting that extra layer there?
I guess naturalism doesn't necessarily explain things for me.
What does it not explain? That I guess what we're trying to find out is, what does spirituality explain for you that religion and God and Jesus doesn't also explain for you? Like, what is it that you see that's the big difference between the two that makes spirituality make sense and not make it just another version of a God or a Jesus or a deity without a name?
Well, I think spirituality puts itself into the world, if that makes it, like, it's part of everything in the world, whereas God wouldn't be.
Didn't God create the world to put himself into?
I don't believe that.
And where is the spirituality in the world? What do you see it in? How do you measure it? How do you know it's there?
Bodies of animals.
What does it look like, I guess?
City.
Like, what is it in the behaviors of humans and animals that you say that is spirituality versus that action is just the body?
For example, being afraid of heights leads to survival. So I would think that how would humans know to be afraid of heights? Through genetic mutation, I think.
Because we've seen other humans smash and die on the ground from heights. Spend 10 minutes on Reddit and you can find it.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is, like, most humans have the fear that prevents most humans from doing that.
Because we've seen what happens and we've heard what happens when humans fall from a great height. And also vertigo is a physical adaptation that our body responds to as well when we look down from a high height. Gravity, but humans literally know what happens to other humans when we fall from great heights. And
and there's a reason that as parents we grab children who are running too close to cliff edges, because they don't understand that.
Right.
And we teach them that behavior.
Right. Spirituality does not impact young children.
You said what spirituality would look like, Sydney?
Well, yeah, I guess what is an activity or an action or a thing that you've seen where you're like, that right there, that's spirituality, versus the other conscious decisions that creatures and humans make?
For example, you have a liver that filters out toxins and knows how to identify toxins and filter them out.
You keep saying this knows.
My left kidney died, so I disagree that it knows how to do that.
You keep saying this knows as though it's an entity in and of itself. It's part of a larger system. And again, I'll refer you back to the car engine. It's like saying that a car engine knows that it has to feed air into the system to get combustion. It doesn't know that. It's not thinking about doing that. I think you're personifying this stuff too much.
Well, a car engine is man-made.
But it doesn't know to do certain things. It is following a system. And this is what you don't seem to be able to grasp. You seem to be inserting this spirituality into systems that don't need it inserting into.
And then why would we see the failure of things like organs if spirituality really did exist and made it function? You know, why would my left kidney be dead if there was a spirituality there controlling everything, making it work appropriately, making sure that, you know, do you see what I'm saying? Or did I do something wrong to make spirituality abandon me?
I think spirituality is neutral. It's not like completely moral or like completely perfect. I just think it's a force, and
but you've not given evidence any reason to think it's anything. Where is its autonomy? How are you pointing to its autonomy? How are you identifying its autonomy? How are you showing that it is a thing independent of physicalism?
That's just how I thought of it.
Okay. Yeah. Well, Stephen, this has been a really great conversation. I get the feeling we're not going to be able to progress any further. I think you've got your thoughts and we've got our thoughts, and we appreciate you calling in. This has been an interesting discussion, but I do think, Richard, if you don't mind, we do have callers waiting, and so I want to make sure they get an opportunity to speak. But yeah, Stephen, thank you for calling. We appreciate having this discussion with you, and you've given us some things to think about, and hopefully we've given you things to think about. And I think we're just going to say goodbye.
Yeah, and I would encourage, Stephen, that you kind of go away and develop a kind of an actual, rather than just saying, well, I think it's this, and ascribing this autonomy to a system, go away and think about how it actually works. How this spirituality actually works, how it interacts with the world, how it manifests in a measurable way, and then give us a call back when you've gathered your thoughts. Because you seem to have a great, it's great, by the way, having a non-theistic supernatural believer on to start with. And the question itself was a good question. I just don't think you'd gathered your thoughts together properly before you'd kind of called in and thought about it.
Right. I think it was more a statement than a question. And so it's difficult to negate statements or to change statements and opinions when they're not necessarily ready to quite change those thoughts and opinions yet.
Yeah, I'm going to bring Tom on, who wants to discuss abortion, who says the opposite of pro-choice is not pro-life. Tom, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Great. So
thanks for calling.
What I'd like to talk about is that the position of pro-life is not, the opposite of that is not pro-choice. The opposite is pro-death. So if you look at pro-choice, or pro-life, sorry if I'm dyslexic here, pro-life says no abortions under any circumstances. Pro-life position is you can need an abortion, you want to have an abortion, you can access that, and if you choose it, you think that an abortion is wrong, you don't have to have one. That's in the middle. The opposite of the pro-life then is pro-death, and that position would be that if you want to have a child, let's say you would have to register the pregnancy and then either have a live birth and then your next one to be terminated, or the first one to be terminated and then you'd have a live one after that. Everybody I've talked with that says that, boy, that's an extreme position, and I agree that it is an extreme position. But I use that as an example to show how extreme the pro-life position is.
Right. Yeah, I think the first mistake we make is calling it pro-life when really what it is pro-birth, because a lot of the exact same people that are pro-life don't necessarily care, or they definitely don't, not even necessarily. They don't care about what happens to the life after it's born. You know, those are oftentimes the same people who advocate for the cutting of welfare services, the cutting of government-funded services like WIC, things that feed families, things that feed infants, things that provide medical care for infants and mothers and single parents. And so I think what the first thing we need to do is call a spade, and pro-life is not pro-life, it's pro-birth, because I consider myself a pro-life person. But what I mean when I say that is, if you are alive, I want to make sure you're living well, you're living cared for. I think that the choice whether or not to have a child should be the person who's carrying the child. And I think that is a true pro-life position. You know, they claim that they're for life, but then they're the exact same people that say, oh, welfare moms are draining the system. Oh, you should have pulled up your bootstraps. You should have thought about that before you opened your legs, yada, yada, yada. And that's not a pro-life stance. That is a pro-birth stance. And then they say, F you when the baby's born, and they don't want to take care of it. So I think what we're actually dealing with is pro-birth, which are people who just want these babies to be born because we need people to work at McDonald's and work at Subway and do the low-paying jobs that they don't want to do. They just want people to fund the system so they can retire, and so the economy can boom again. And instead of, you know, addressing the economic problem, they're just like, force people to have babies. We don't like women. And then I think pro-life are the people that say, pro-quality of life, which includes access to abortion, which includes access to medical care, which includes affordable food and housing and education. That, in my opinion, is a true pro-life stance. So my first problem is just those people who only want to teach you a lesson by forcing you to give birth in a country, especially here, where they give it up for adoption. That system is so overrun with children who can't get adopted because the exact same people who demand you give it up for adoption also aren't adopting children. You know, you ask people standing outside of abortion clinics protesting, how many kids have you adopted? I have never heard the answer be more than 0. Never once. In all the videos I've watched and all the TikToks I've watched and all the online discourse, the answer of how many children they have ever adopted is never above 0. I have never once heard somebody say, oh, I've actually adopted 2 babies from somebody who was going to have an abortion at this clinic. So I think it's a sham for them to call themselves pro-life when the opposite is true, and they could not care less about life, especially the life of the mother, especially the life of the infant. They just want to make sure that it's born and put into the system. And then after that, it's the mom's fault. She should have thought about that.
Yeah, I agree with you on everything you said. I use the pro-life term because that's a term that everybody...
Oh, yeah, no, totally. I'm just saying...
Life begins at conception and ends at birth. A second thought I'd like to throw out there for you. Do you remember the Tylenol murders?
Yes.
I think it was in the 70s or early 80s.
Yes. Yeah.
Someone put poison in pills, put them on the shelf, and then weeks later somebody died. Another example of that is that when a woman is pregnant and she's legally not able to access a termination of the pregnancy if the fetus has died, and she loses her life, all that loss is put upon the woman. In a sense, the male was the person that impregnated her, so he has some responsibility for that. If he hadn't done that, she would not have died. I'm suggesting that maybe when we start passing, states pass these anti-abortion laws at the same time, they should pass a law that allows a man to be charged with manslaughter. And actually, in a sense, you could argue that the guy killed 2 people. If the woman died and the fetus died, 2 people died. You could even charge him with conspiracy because him and the woman conspired to have sex, which resulted in her death. I think that if men start to die when women die because they can't access an abortion, that maybe people will say, well, maybe it would make more sense to have abortion legal. And
but see, that makes too much sense, Tom. Makes too much sense. We can't have that.
I know. Isn't that crazy?
Yeah. Yeah. It's
a Greek guy, 411, Aristophanes. He wrote a play called Lystrata. It basically is a comic play about the Peloponnesian Wars, and the women got upset with the men and said, "You guys need to stop fighting." And the guy's like, "Nah, we like fighting. We'll keep fighting." And the women all band together and said, "All right, if you guys want to fight, no more sex." I think all these women that live in states where abortion is illegal, they should refuse to have sex with the men in their lives until abortion is safe and legal.
But here's the problem with that. That was written by, you can tell that play was written by a man because nobody gets assaulted in that play for not putting out. And so what another problem that women have to deal with is, even if every single woman in the United States said we're no longer having sex until abortion is legalized, rape would just be legalized. Like, let's just, be honest with ourselves, unfortunately.
You take all the fun out of my ideas.
I know, because I was actually in the play Lysistrata, a terrible version. It was not good. I'm glad nobody saw it. But I love the idea. And I think it's a very powerful women's literature in terms of the female characters. But I do also think that the reason you can tell it was written by a man is because the realistic thing did not happen, and that is marital rape and, things like that happen in society. Now, granted, I would hope that most people who are in relationships would never have to deal with that. Like, I know that I would never have to deal with that. But that is a real, true consequence to women standing up for themselves, especially when it comes to birth and birth control. If every man in society knew that they were not on birth control, that's when that problem would arise. And then it's like, what do we do about that problem, right? Are we suddenly rolling back any laws that were created to protect married women, to protect women in abusive relationships and things like that? And so it all goes, in my opinion, back to what we need to fix is the root of the problem, and that's how much people hate women.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, which is a bummer, because I do love the idea of, like, the play Lysistrata was a really fun story, and I do like that idea. If only it worked. I don't know, Richard, what are your thoughts? Am I just being a Debbie Downer?
No, I don't know. I think I don't really have. I don't really think about this subject very often because I'm not a woman, and I want women to have the autonomy to do what women want to do, and I don't think I have a right to do that. Have that conversation. If I have that conversation in any practical way, it would be with my wife, who is also a woman, and I would have to take feelings into account. So it's
right.
I'm not sure. I'm not entirely sure that kind of criminalizing men in the getting women pregnant process is necessarily a good idea. I think that might contribute to even more problems.
It's as unhinged as the idea of criminalizing women. Yeah. But if we're going unhinged, we might as well go even keeled unhinged.
let's just have everybody going around doing bizarre things, and getting blamed for stuff. I don't know. It's a difficult topic to discuss. I think whenever we're talking about pro-life or all, I find it fascinating how these people who claim to be pro-life, who claim to demand that women give birth, are also largely the same people who kind of demand the death penalty.
Isn't that interesting?
Where's the pro-life in that? It is, I think as you correctly reframed, Sydney, there needs to be a redefinition of terms there, because that doesn't sound very pro-life to me.
Yeah, what also doesn't sound pro-life? The fact that the same exact state in the United States that has the highest concentration of megachurches also has the highest concentration of people put to death in prison. Isn't that interesting? Very interesting.
Yeah,
also, statistically, women who are seeking an abortion are oftentimes already married women with children who already exist. So it's not even like, oh, I don't want to be a responsible parent. It's, I have kids already and they are expensive. Or I have a medical problem. Or for whatever reason, financially, we can't afford this child. But they want you to think it's people going, oh, I just don't want to use condoms, and I'm the woman, and I'm doing this by myself because apparently a second person wasn't involved in the process, and I should have known better.
I'm making people have sex with me. I'm forcing people to have sex with me, and then I'm choosing to murder the child.
Right.
Because I'm a devil-ridden whore.
And then I'm going to drain the government so I can buy free sandwich supplies at Walmart.
Yeah, people actually think like this, y'all. It's a very dangerous world we live in, unfortunately. Yes. Tom, thank you for your call. I enjoy calls like that because I largely just get to listen and be educated myself as well. So I do enjoy listening to, especially when I've got someone as eloquent as Sydney hosting with me. I just like to sit back and be a fan, to be honest with you, when calls like that come on. Stuart, we're going to take a mental health nurse who says they have a simple strategy to help theists accept credit for their achievements.
Oh,
let's speak to Stuart.
I was going to say that's quite the claim. Let's see.
Hello.
Hello. Yes.
Hello. Hi. Yeah. Hi. Nice to speak to you both. It's a really simple strategy. It's an analogy that I think is attributed to Norman Vincent Peale originally, who was an early 20th century Christian evangelist. But the idea is, obviously, I'm a mental health nurse. I talk to people about their problems, but it's not my place to attack their religion. That's, those conversations don't happen in my job. So this is a nice way to get people to accept it's not just God. And the analogy is really straightforward. You talk about this very run-down country house with a lovely garden that's completely overgrown, and the house is falling apart. And somebody buys this house, and they spend a year working laboriously, doing it up, and cultivating the garden and landscaping it. And a year later, it is absolutely beautiful. And the local parson is walking down the road one day, and he goes past the front garden of the house, and this guy who's done all the work is stood there at the front of his garden, pruning his roses or whatever it might be. And the parson says, God has blessed you with a beautiful home. And the fellow says, yes, he has. But you should have seen it when he had it all to himself.
That's funny.
So many people just get it. Barely get it. But you don't have to say God's not a part of it, but you have a place too. And I find nothing works all the time, but very often I find that people who are so wrapped up in not by my will but thine just suddenly grok it, they get it. And then they can take credit for their achievements, and that has an impact on self-esteem. But more importantly, it has an impact upon their sense of what they can achieve tomorrow with that. And that's it, really. I don't want to take a lot of your time, but I just thought it would be useful to make that point.
No, I appreciate that very, very much, Stuart. We will let you go. Thank you for calling and waiting, and thank you for that nice little anecdote as well. That's quite good, especially, as you say, working in a profession where you can't necessarily have those conversations. It's good to bring stuff like that up. We do have another super chat from Nero, who sends $5 and says the profile stance ends up on birth because they, in most cases, only care about more people going to heaven as long as they can go out Christian.
I don't know, man. I really think it's more about people who are getting older and want to retire, and they recognize with the number of people that we have right now, it's not supporting the economy here in the United States to be able to retire. And so they're just literally trying to force people to be born and put into the workforce. That might sound conspiracy theorist of mine, but I really think it has more to do with, I mean, if you look at the ages, especially in the United States, of people who are staunch evangelicals and people who are in office, many of them are much older and they want to retire, and they're recognizing that they won't be able to do so with the amount of people that are contributing in the labor force right now. And also, they just don't like women, and they don't want women to have like rights and freedoms and enjoy life. And they like anybody who says they prefer it the way it used to be in the olden days. They all kind of are the similar type of people, you know what I mean? And there's a reason they like the olden days, because women couldn't vote. They got to have private clubs where only the people who looked like them were allowed, and they got to do and say whatever they wanted in the workforce. And it was a much easier time to not have to listen to people like me giving opinions when we weren't asked.
Damn you women and your opinions.
I wish it were about sending people to heaven. I truly wish it were about sending more people to heaven for like glorification. But I don't think it is, unfortunately.
No, I agree with you. We do have, I want to get to another call, but so I just noticed that someone in the chat did say, wouldn't Richard be a whore-ridden devil in that case? I'm happy to be a whore-ridden devil in any sense, anyone at any time. I'm just cheap like that. Let's bring in Nathan, who wants to talk about the mistrust in scientific consensus and people's seemingly weakened epistemology. This should be a good one. Nathan, how are you?
Oh, I'm pretty good, you guys. How's it going?
Not bad.
Very well, thank you.
Hit us with it.
Good to talk to you. Okay, so forgive me if I ramble here a little bit, but I've been up all night working on my thesis. I'm in a master's program, and
congrats. Hardcore.
To make it's hardcore, yeah. But trying to make a long story short, I grew up fundamentalist and hard right Christian, evangelical. Didn't even have running water. We're basically Mennonites.
Wow.
And over time, of course, I became a skeptic and a secular. Oh yeah, it was crazy, y'all. If you all ever heard of Bob Jones University, I ended up going there for a year, and that was super liberal.
No.
They were like, "Oh, you got to be careful going there," you know.
Yeah.
People don't do KJV only.
That's liberal. Wow.
Yeah. That's my background. But because of that, I grew up very, very interested and kind of obsessed with the cult mentality, how people come to believe the things that they do in these situations. And so I started off in linguistics. I'm studying communication now. I'm basically studying cult mentality, polarization, and conspiracy theories and things like that. Now, okay, so here's the situation as I'm studying it. This is what I'm coming to understand. And I'm hoping that you guys can give me hope, because I am without it at this moment. And that's why I'm calling. It seems that people don't seem to have an ontological world model that is anything close to recognizable to the actual world. There's a little phrase they say, the world outside versus the picture in your heads. And it seems like the picture in our heads is just basically is becoming increasingly divorced from the world outside. There's this dude, Baudrillard. He's the guy behind the Matrix movies. They based those movies off of him, where it's like what happens is that world model that you have in your head becomes more and more based on like slogans and symbols and tropes and things that actually don't even have any referent out there in the real world. And we are entering what a lot of people are calling a post-fact society. Now, my parents are still hyper-evangelical fundamentalists. COVID is a conspiracy theory. The earth isn't warming, rah-rah, that stuff. And I was having a conversation with them the other day, as well as my cousin, and I keep seeing this over and over and over again. People keep saying, well, how do you know what's true? How do you know that you can trust your sources? How do you know that? Like, there doesn't seem to be any way for us to tell what's true anymore. And this is frightening to me, because there's this thing we have called the scientific method. And it is the most reliable way of conducting epistemology. And these people don't trust science because science is mainstream, and they go on the mainstream news, and the mainstream news, you can't trust them, so therefore you can't trust science. So it seems like epistemology itself is being systematically destroyed. And I am terrified of that. The scientific method isn't good enough. You can't trust that. So, like, to me, the only way we can recover from this situation is getting back to like a basic epistemology where we like do the science. And but nobody wants to do that. And so I'm starting to think, I mean, like when COVID hit, trust in science dropped 10%. Because science was telling us to do something that was mildly inconvenient to save each other's lives. So people got all like pissy about science. So what I'm seeing is this seems to me to be the dawning of a dark age because we can't find anything to connect on. There's no common basis of fact. And I am seeking hope here because I think we're kind of fucked.
No, I have hope for you. I have hope. Not to cut you off, I'm just like so excited to talk about this. So actually, while it seems like we're headed towards a dark age, because politically, say what you like, I'm not naming sides or names, but we're headed to a rough direction depending on decisions that are made. But let me give you a little bit of hope. It sounds like those are the people that are bigger and stronger and coming out of the woodwork, when really what's happening is statistically people are leaving the church and they're leaving religion and they're leaving faith, especially, and this is for the United States. I know not everybody who watches this is for the US, but my scope is the US. People are becoming non-religious and atheistic and agnostic at a higher and faster rate than ever before in this country. So that is why we are hearing the people who are anti-science, who are anti-vax, who are anti-women's rights, who are anti-abortion, getting louder and louder and louder. Because what's actually happening is they are losing. They are running out of people. People are no longer supporting their lifestyle. For example, I'm from Arkansas and I live in Tennessee, and I know a lot of young Republicans who could not be further from the old Republicans than you can even imagine. Like, they are actually having a divide in their party between the young and the old, because even the young people are saying we should trust science. You can be religious and still trust science. This is crazy. And so while it seems like the loudest and the most heard voices and the most promoted voices are the ones that are dispelling science and disbelieving and actively trying to pass laws and rules and educational materials that are against everything we know science to support. The reason they are doing that is because more people than ever before and higher numbers of people than ever before are turning towards science, are turning against the Bible, are turning against church, are saying, I'm no longer considered Christian. I no longer think that this is true, and they're freaking out. So there's going to be this weird period where we are going to have the conversations like the ones you're talking about, where you're going to hear loved ones that you really want to help and you really want to be able to get through to. We're going to continue to butt heads with them. We're going to continue to lose friendships. We're going to continue to lose regular relationships with some of our longest friends, loved ones. But to give you hope, we are headed so quickly in a non-religious direction and a pro-science direction that's why we're seeing the pushback that we're seeing now, where anti-science, pro-religion stuff is just being force-fed through as many systems as it possibly can, because those people are dying out. And in the next 20 years, there will be, I would think, more numbers of pro-science people, including religious people. Even Christians and religious people are becoming much more pro-science, anti-leaving everything in the hands of God than ever before. And so we are going to see what looks like religion taking a higher power and anti-science taking a higher power, because those people are freaking out, because they see that their numbers are dwindling due to age and other things and not taking vaccines and things like that. And people who love science and believe science and promote science are now old enough to do things like impact education and impact whether or not they go to church. And we have bigger platforms than ever before. We can have podcasts, we can have channels, we can have TikToks, we can have shareable content. more so than ever before, and they're struggling to compete. And the only way that they can compete right now is the fact that their folks are the ones in certain levels of power that can make certain decisions and are doing so as rapidly as they possibly can to try and force their beliefs to stay the way things are, the status quo, and that's not going to last. And there's just no way that that can last. And I have faith. Gen Z gives me so much faith. I am so proud of them. I love what they're doing. And I think we're in good hands. We're just going to have to make it through the murky, messy, scary period where it's hard to justify some of the things that we're going to have to watch happen in order to get to the other side.
Wow. Man, thank you so much. That makes so much sense to me. So it's like the last reactionary gasp of a wolverine backed into a corner, snarling on its way out.
Yes, it is the deer kicking and screaming while the alligator's dragging it into the water.
Gotcha.
Yep.
I'm gonna be a bit more pessimistic.
For a silent majority, they sure are a loud minority, huh? Wow.
Nathan, I'm going to be a bit more pessimistic, but pessimistic with a silver lining. I'll just let you know that to start with. So it's not all going to be. It's not going to be all downtrodden and miserable. I think this call really excites me because it's something like Sydney that I'm hugely passionate about this subject, and I think. One thing we have to take into account is in religious studies, which is my academic background, we have this idea came along in the 70s called secularism, and it's this idea that religion will be replaced by rationalism and secularism, and this everybody will go from being religious to being all critical thinkers, and that I'm afraid to say is bullshit. And it's not the case. And you only have to look at countries like mine where people have coming out of religion and have been coming out of religion for a long time, but still cling to ideas like the earlier caller we had who still think that the supernatural is real. Very few of the people I interact with on a daily basis are religious. They don't believe in God, but they do believe in things like ghosts and spirits and the supernatural. A lot of them believe in conspiracy theories around COVID and other things, from the moon landing to flat Earth to all these things. I think there is a real problem. I genuinely do think there is a real problem.
It's a definite problem. Yeah, it's definitely not positive. Like the road there is going to be bumpy and ugly, 100%. Yeah.
But I'm passionate about it, and I do think there is a silver lining. My wife's an educational psychologist. I do the shit I do with educating people. We both, I've been talking to people recently about going into schools and talking about skepticism and critical thinking and things. I'm passionate about this subject, and I'm passionate that we can, with education, change the tide. But that is the vital thing with education. And we've got this scary thing in kind of, I don't know what it's like in the US. I imagine it's the same. But in Britain, we've got this scary thing with education where if you homeschool your child, there is no curriculum standard as such you can teach your kid whatever you want to teach it. And there are lots and lots of people who do homeschool who are religious and who don't necessarily understand the science and don't want to teach the science, and because they don't understand it or because they've got these ideas. So there is a real problem out there. And I don't think it does any justice to anybody to give this kind of whole rosy rainbow view of things, because it's, we do live in a world where this is a real problem. The joy of it all is that there is ways around it. We can educate people, and that education is so important. And the way we educate people is by talking to them and talking to them on a human level, not by demonizing people because they're religious, not by inviting them to call in shows to shout at them and mock them and criticize them because of their religious belief, but to investigate, like we did with the earlier caller who was believed in the supernatural but not religion, to get them to look at things from a different angle, to say, what are the reasons you think that? Rather than attacking science, rather than attacking this notion of physicalism, let's think about why you believe this alternative is true, and reframe things. And it's so important to kind of get people to think about things and think about how they are thinking about things, rather than just, it's easy enough to say, well, think about stuff. But you know what? That's exactly what conspiracy theorists say. Conspiracy theorists are the first people who say out to go and say, do your research. But they don't say, think about how you're thinking about stuff. Think about the methodology. Think about your epistemology. Think about your scaffolding and your framework. Look at the mistakes you might be making when you're thinking about things. And all these things are so vitally, vitally important. The future, I think, is kind of dire at the minute with the way things are going. But as I said at the beginning of the, kind of my response to you, I think it is etched with a wonderful, wonderful silver lining. And that silver lining is education and talking to people like the human beings.
Right. And let me clarify, I didn't mean it to sound like it was going to be easy, because we still have to do the legwork. We still have to vote. We still have to make sure we stand up for the, very much like you said, Richard, education, conversations, dialogue. It's not going to be easy, and it's not going to be pretty, because the loudest and the most vehement people are people that are in very important places of power. So I don't mean for it to sound like it's going to be easy. It's going to be hard, and we have to keep going. It's not an automated system where people are just statistically going to keep leaving the church. We have to be the ones out here having these conversations, promoting these conversations, not being silent when they say, don't talk about, religion and politics at the dinner table. No, talk about it. If they're going to talk about theirs, we're going to talk about ours, right? But it's not impossible. And the younger generations, I have a lot of hope, and I think they're going to do really good things. But to Richard's point, as long as we protect their education and their minds and their gullibility and their access to just as much information that's true and pro-science as they have access to false information, and making sure they learn about things like thought process and not just regurgitating what they believe. I truly don't think I had an open mind until I was at least 26 years old. It took me a long time to stop regurgitating what I was told as fact without knowing anything. And that was after I'd already had several years in my debate career, right? So I had access to research and I literally did it for scholarship. But it's there, and I really have a lot of hope. And the only way we can lose is if we lose that hope and stop doing the hard work and stop putting in the legwork and stop paving that groundwork. But it's not nearly as impossible as it might feel to Nathan.
Nathan, would you like to respond? And then we're going to let you go.
Yeah, I'm just going to say one real quick thing, and maybe it's an exhortation more than a question or anything, or a rebuttal. But as to the point about education, yes, absolutely. And I think that's probably why the education system is such a battleground right now. And I just want to tell you, the thesis that I had planned, I have to work on a different thesis now. And the reason is because my coordinator, my advisor, was literally threatened for his life last time he did anything like what I wanted to do. Like, he has kids. He doesn't like. I'm going after these people. Like, I'm going hard. And I'm really breaking it down what it is they're doing, like psychologically, the whole thing. And he's like, yeah, I did that before. I had to move. Like, I feared for my children's life for 2 years. And we see what's going on in the schools where they're replacing the stories of what happened with the Native Americans. You know, They agreed to give up their land in exchange for wampum. It's a battleground. Is all I wanted to say. And it's just a fight that I think we need to really focus on.
Just don't give up.
Thanks.
Don't give up, Nathan. You're one of us. You gotta help us fight.
Yeah, we appreciate Nathan. That was an amazing call. I think it's something that both myself and Sydney are really, really passionate about. It's something I am actively engaged in.
The way my face lit up when he said cults, I was like,
yeah, I'm actively engaged in this. I've had to deal with misinformation from my own family when my mum died of it, not directly of COVID, but COVID was the kind of underlying cause of what made her die. Exasperated that condition that she already held. And, members of my own family, upon hearing the news of my mum's death, decided to go on a rant against COVID instead of expressing sympathy for both themselves. And this were people this wasn't like kind of distant relatives. This was very, very close relatives to my mum. And, they went on rants about COVID when I was giving them the news of her death instead of expressing sympathy. This is a really, really, it's a really important subject to talk about in every respect, whether we're talking about conspiracy theories, whether we're talking about the kind of cult mentalities, whether we're talking about the need for education in skepticism and critical thinking. This is all really, really important stuff. And this is the core of when I'm not hosting these shows, when I'm not engaging in the kind of, religious and philosophy work that I do, when this is the core of what I do, is going and talking about this stuff and educating people and having these conversations and trying to get them to look at things from a different framework. It's so important to me. So I really, really appreciate closing out the show on that call.
Absolutely. Before we really close out, though, I would like to take a moment to thank our favorite person. Well, one of our favorite people. I don't want to cause a fight in the back end there. Kelly, for helping us out today. Kelly's been in the background, and Kelly's going to be on Discord with us later. So, Kelly, you're just a gem. No pun intended. Sorry, that's why I quit comedy. So thank you, Kelly. Thanks for being with us here today. And just a reminder for everybody else, the prompt for this week to post in the comments is, what would you say to an evangelizer that they would never forget? Don't forget to put those in the comments, not in the live chat, in the comments, in order to be considered for next week. Now, Richard, are you going to be on Discord later?
Yes, myself, Kelly, and I believe yourself are going to be on Discord. We do have one final super chat from King Cat Chess, who sends $2 Canadian. I don't know what that means, but I don't know what American dollars mean either, so it means nothing to me.
It just has fewer guns, that's all.
Have you heard of the illusion of objectivity? No. And that, I think, was for one of our previous callers, because that's when that came in. But we've been ranting and raving that much since then that we've only just got to it. We appreciate all the super chats. We appreciate Kelly, the wonderful Kelly Laughlin, for being our wonderful backup host. And, Thanks for letting me. Anytime, sir. You might be seeing a lot more of Kelly, because I usually do the backup host, but I'm on vacation for a couple of weeks. So Kelly's going to be spending a lot more time in that backup chair. The prompt for this week is, what would you say to an evangelizer that they would never forget? Reply in the comments and tune in at the beginning of next week's episode to hear the top 3 answers. And if applicable, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm reading the thing straight off. It is applicable. Go to ACD afterwards and you can talk to myself, Kelly, and Sydney. And if you do not believe, if you don't believe, we don't hate you.
We're just not convinced.
We want the truth, so watch Truth Wanted live Friday at 7 p.m. Central. Visit tiny.cc/YTTW and call into the show at 512-991-9242 or connect to the show online at tiny.cc/calltw.